Hebrews 4. Therefore, since a promise remains of entering into his rest, let us fear, lest any of you seem to have come short of it. Therefore, since a promise remains of entering into his rest, right? Remember that in the previous chapter, it was talking about entering the promised land, the 40 years going around. In fact, well, what we have been seeing for Brother David, that's also part of it. That's why in the previous chapter, he spoke of the 40 years and the fact that they had to wait and not rebel like they did in the desert, because there will be 2,000 years. Yet they didn't understand it because they were not given to know the times, as we see in the book of Acts 1, because that was a mystery. And because if they knew that there were 2,000 years still to go, they wouldn't have written everything that they wrote, at least the way they wrote it. And we needed it the way it was written, because it was written as if everything was going to happen in that time. But since we are reading it now, it fits with our time. So therefore, since a promise remains of entering into his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it. For indeed the good news were brought to us as well as to them. But the word which they heard did not profit them, not having been mixed with belief in those who heard it. Right? The good news, the besorot, are the fact that Yahushua came to save us. Those are the good news. Salvation is already available. But even then, salvation was available in the sense of, well, justification, because remember that Abraham, he believed, and that was accounted as justice. So Abraham was justified through his faith. So back in the day before Mashiach, they had to have faith in the fact that Mashiach would come. Now that he already came, we have to have faith that he came. So it's pretty much the same. Just some had to believe that he was coming, the others have to believe that he came. So for indeed the good news were brought to us as well as to them, but the word which they heard did not profit them, not having been mixed with belief in those who heard it. So they heard the word, and that connects. Remember that faith comes through hearing, and hearing by the word. They heard the word, but they did not mix it with belief. They didn't believe what they heard, and that's why they didn't receive the promise. They couldn't enter the land. For indeed the good news were brought to us as well as to them, but the word which they heard did not profit them, not having been mixed with belief in those who heard it. For we who have believed do enter into that rest. This is important for many reasons, because you see how it says do enter. It doesn't say will enter, because when we believe in Mashiach, we are entering already. Even if we still remain in this reality, we spiritually already have entered the rest. And that is what gives us the peace that surpasses all understanding. But other than that, it's important because remember that rest is the meaning, or one of the meanings, of the word Shabbat. The Shabbat is the seventh millennium. And that's why, as in Romans 14, we read that once we accept, we read what the true Shabbat is. And I explain, well, in Isaiah 58 and Romans 14, how the people who are of weak faith do not understand the true Shabbat. So they get stuck in the 24-hour period of the seventh day of the week. Yet when Mashiach came, he was accused of breaking the Shabbat. Yet he said, my Father works till now, and I work. So that means that Yahushua and the Shabbat Yahushua was talking about the seventh millennium. They were in the fourth millennium, so they were still working. The Shabbat is the last millennium, the seventh millennium. So when we accept Mashiach and have the faith in the good news, then we enter the rest. That means we enter the Shabbat even if we have not come to the millennium. So we should live every day as if it was Shabbat. And that doesn't mean don't go to work. It means don't go to sin, because sin enslaves. So it makes you work for the enemy. So we should always, every day, should rest from the works of the flesh, from the works of the enemy. For we who have believed do enter to that rest, as he has said, as I swore in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest. And yet his works have come into being from the foundation of the world. His works, that's important as well, because he's talking about the rest, right? The Shabbat. Yet his works have come into being from the foundation of the world. And he continues to work. Why? Because this reality continues to exist. If he didn't want to, everything would cease to exist. If he were to rest. And yet his works have come into being from the foundation of the world. He makes everything come into being every second of this reality, every instant. So for we who have believed do enter into that rest, as he has said, as I swore in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest. And yet his works have come into being from the foundation of the world. For somewhere he has said thus about the seventh day. So you see that he's talking about the millennium. For somewhere he has said thus about the seventh day. And Elohim rested on the seventh day from all his works. So he says, obviously in Genesis 2:2, for somewhere he has said thus about the seventh day, and Elohim rested on the seventh day from all his works. And in this again, if they shall enter into my rest. So the point that he's trying to make is show how when Yahweh was talking about entering his rest, he had an interpretation regarding them entering the promised land where they would rest from the 40 years of going around in the desert and from the slavery of Egypt. The slavery in Egypt represents slavery to sin. That slavery in Egypt ended when they sacrificed the lamb. Just like when Mashiach came and they sacrificed him, if we believe in those good news, not that he was killed, but that through his death we receive salvation, that he was willing to give himself for us, those good news, then we enter the rest. Even though there were still 40 years, 40 jubilees to go around before entering the promised land, which is being called here the rest. So once again, we have Egypt as the 4,000 years that passed before Mashiach came. Then Mashiach came as the lamb that was sacrificed. 40 years are those 40 jubilees, meaning 2,000 years. And then we will enter the day of rest, the Shabbat. But if we hear today, as the scripture just said a while ago, if today we hear his voice, we enter the rest if we mix our belief with it so that we can have that rest within us, the peace that surpasses all understanding, for instance. For somewhere he had said thus about the seventh day, and Elohim rested on the seventh day from all his works. And in this again, if they shall enter into my rest. Since then, it remains for some to enter into it, and those who formerly received the good news did not enter in because of disobedience. He again, and now this is also important, because if the millennium, well, I would have to see how they would see that. But if the millennium already happened, I mean, when we read in the scriptures about the millennium, it refers to a time in this earth, because this earth is the one with humanity that is going to rest during that millennium, those 1,000 years. So here is saying that some enter and some didn't. So if the millennium had happened already, and I would like to know, like, when they say, like, starting when Mashiach left, I guess. So that means that we would be like already 1,000 years after the millennium. But every person that was during that time on the earth would have entered it, and many of them, not to say most of them, didn't believe. So how could they be part of that millennium? And if that happened already, why are we the way we are at the moment, as well as the world is? So, yeah, well, since then it remains for some to enter into it, and those who formerly received the good news did not enter in because of disobedience. He again defines a certain day, today. He again defines a certain day, today. So you see how he's once again bringing us back to that day, today, because whenever you hear about it is when you should believe in it, not leave it for tomorrow. And we can live in the Shabbat today, because if we already believed, we enter it. He again defines a certain day, today, saying through David, so much later, as as it has been said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Yahushua had given them rest, you see here how this is one of the verses that had some issues when the King James was written. You see how in this case he writes it down, even though when the name of Mashiach appears, it appears in Hebrew. Well, it was in the previous chapter. But here he writes the name, although wrong, Yehoshua, because they are writing uh, the first perversion that was created after Yahushua left. They added the E and O at the beginning from the word Elohim. The E and the O of Elohim. You see the title here, E O, Yeho, but it is Yahoo. So for if Yahushua, but in this case is referring to the one known as Joshua. For if Yahushua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that. Showing that what Yahushua, known as Joshua, did was a parallel. It was a shadow of what had to come through Yahushua the Messiah. For if Yahushua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that. So there remains a Shabbat keeping for the people of Elohim. So there remains a Shabbat keeping for the people of Elohim. Like saying, um, that they were not entering the Shabbat, they were not entering the millennium when they entered the land. And in a way, we could say that still when Yahushua, the Messiah, came, the world was not entering the seventh millennium yet. Yet remember, as Paul says, that we are sitting in heavenly places at the moment, even though we're still on this earth. The same way we can be in the millennium or keeping the Shabbat in our time. So there remains a Shabbat keeping for the people of Elohim. For the one having entered into his rest, Yahushua, has himself also rested from his works, as Elohim rested from his own. For the one having entered into his rest, so once Yahushua died, he already fulfilled all the works that he had to fulfill. So once he died, he rested. And if we died through him, we also rest from the works of the flesh. And that's the point. For the one having entered into his rest has himself also rested from his works, as Elohim rested from his own. Let us therefore do our utmost to enter into that rest. So, and I'm just going to say this just in case those people who believe that the millennium already happened, perhaps they would use what has been said already in this chapter to say, you see that they enter the Shabbat when he left, right? They might take those verses and interpret them like saying that he's saying that when it comes to chronology, once Mashiach left, then the Shabbat, the millennium started. And they might interpret those verses that we just read in that way by not understanding them in the spiritual sense. So here we get something very clear. Let us therefore do our utmost to enter into that rest. Okay, so it's not talking about time. It's not talking about human history in this reality. Because if that was so, they would already be there. They would have entered already. Anybody, everybody. Yet it is saying, let us therefore do our utmost to enter. So we need to believe in order to enter. It's not about the time of human history. It's about our belief. That is what is going to make us enter that rest. Therefore, do our utmost to enter into that rest, lest anyone fall after the same example of disobedience. For the word of Elohim is living and working. There you go, working. The word is working. For the word of Elohim is living and working and sharper than any two-edged sword. Two-edged in the sense of mercy and justice, first and last, kingdom, priesthood, etc., etc. And sharper than any two-edged sword, cutting through even to the dividing of being and spirit, and of joints and marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. That's why we need to read the scriptures constantly, and that will help us to separate that which is of the flesh from that which is of the spirit. And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all are naked and laid bare before the eyes of him with whom is our account. And there is no creature hidden from his sight. Yet we see in Genesis that Adam hid himself from Elohim. And then Elohim asked, where are you? So as I always say, one thing is the ignorance of Adam at that time, thinking that he could hide from the Most High. And the question, where are you, was from Yahweh for Adam to think about what he had done and to know where that took him. But in the lower interpretation of that same thing is that he was able to hide himself from an angel, the angel that also used the title Elohim. And that's why he asked, "Where are you?" And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all are naked and laid bare before the eyes of him with whom is our account. Therefore, since we have a great high priest, once again, showing that Yahushua is the high priest, that is his main title and role. And well, when I say that, I mean when it comes to the first manifestation. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, for there are many, Yahushua, the son of Yahweh, let us hold fast our confession. Let us hold fast our confession. Just like we confess our sins in repentance, we confess that Yahweh saves by confessing the name of the Son, Yahushua. For with the heart one believes unto righteousness, but with the mouth confession is made for salvation. Romans 10:10. For we do yeah, for we do not have a high priest unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who was tried in all respects as we are, apart from sin. Right? He was tried in all respects as every person is, yet he remained apart from sin. He never, but more than that, to bring forgiveness of sins for us. Therefore, let us come boldly to the throne of favor in order to receive compassion. The throne of favor, because remember, there are two thrones represented by the names Yahweh, Elohim. And it says here the throne of favor. That would be Mashiach. It is through Yahushua HaMashiach that we receive favor, meaning forgiveness of sins. Therefore, let us come boldly to the throne of favor in order to receive compassion and find favor for timely help. And that's once again how that chapter ends.